It's Sunday, August 14th, 2016, and this is the Product Mentor Talk. Today we're joined by one of our mentors, Andy Wadhwa, VP, Head of Product over at Boost Media, and he's going to lead a talk on elephants, deer, and rabbits, choosing the right customer for your products. For those of you who might be joining us for the first time today, this talk is brought to you by the Product Mentor, and the Product Mentor program is a global initiative where we pair up mentors and mentees in the field of product management all around the world. Over 20 different countries we're active in to help make better products, better product people, and better product decisions. The people you see along the bottom of your screen here today are those who are mentors and mentees who are active within the current session of the Product Mentor. So what we're going to quickly do is just go around with some quick introductions, who you are, whether or not you're a mentor or a mentee, and then I'll tell you a little bit more before we get fully started. I'm going to go left to right on my screen, and so that brings me to Andy. Well, Andy, I'll let you go first.
Hi everybody, my name is Andy Wadhwa and I'm a mentor in the program, and I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Excellent, and so next we're going to go to Dave.
Hey everyone, Dave Scribella, product enthusiast based here in New York City and a mentor in the current cohort.
Excellent, and next Fuquan.
Hi, this is Furkan. I work for a company named Seamless, which makes software for the telecom companies on the food delivery, and I am a mentee in the current session.
Excellent. And I am Jeremy Horn, aka the Product Guy, and I'll be moderating here today. And so for those of you who are joining us, you can submit your questions to theproductmentor.com/live. Along the top is the video. Click to tab 4 and click play. Then that's how you get the live video. And then on the bottom you'll see the questions where you can post your questions up. As long as it's topical, as long as it's related to the topic, we will make sure we answer those questions in fairly real time. The things that are a little bit more generic, perhaps what is product management, where did it come from, things like that, we'll save for the end of the talk, and we'll try to address those at that time. And with all that said, let me hand it over to Andy to take it away.
All right, Jeremy, thank you, and thank you all for tuning in to my talk today. I am going to jump right into my presentation here, so bear with me while I pull it up. All right. Hopefully you all can see my screen here with the slides. Our talk for today is called Elephants, Deer, and Rabbits. And for those of you who are wondering, what in the world do these animals have to do with product management? Well, they actually happen to be great metaphors for the types of customers you want to be hunting down to build your products for as target customers, particularly in the B2B space. So I'm going to be sharing some thoughts today based on my experience around why, in our role as product managers, we need to be constantly thinking about who are the right set of target customers for our products, and how can we apply these animal metaphors in that process. First, I'd like to share a little bit about myself. I have been in product management, working in the tech industry, building software for over 10 years now. During that time, I've had the privilege of building products in a wide variety of different companies, as well as focusing on both consumer as well as building out B2B enterprise products, both startups and mid-sized companies. You can get a sense of some of the companies I've worked at looking at some of the logos on this slide. And for those of you who are interested in learning a little bit more about my path into product management, I actually started with a bachelor's degree in computer science. At that point, I knew that I was particularly passionate about technology and solving challenging problems, but wasn't so much into going into software development. And so I actually started my career as a business analyst, working on fairly large technology projects. And then a few years into my career, I had the opportunity of transitioning into an internet company to become a product manager in Los Angeles. So I jumped on that, really enjoyed sort of the role of product management, And as time went by, also had the opportunity of going to business school at UCLA Anderson to get an MBA degree. And if you're curious about sort of the value of B School, I would certainly say it's been a nice complement to sort of my technical schooling in computer science. On paper, sort of the CS undergraduate degree has been awesome, primarily because not only is it in high demand for a lot of the tech opportunities, but also most companies want to have some technical product experience under most product managers' belts so that they can sort of interact with engineers effectively. And then sort of having the analytical rigor that comes with an MBA, as well as sort of the business savvy, sort of works well as well, primarily since in many cases you're not just focused on the execution of a technical product, but you're also sort of carving out a product vision and a strategy. So having those business skills have come in handy for me throughout my career. So as for an overview of today's talk, I'll be breaking out our talk into 3 separate sections. The first piece is focused primarily on providing some context on why it's important to have a very well-defined target set of customers for your product. So my experience, I've come across and worked at a number of companies. Some of them have been very product-driven, others have been quite sales-driven, and there's been just a few that have really been truly market-driven. And so what I've come across and seen along my experience has been that when you're working with more product and sales-driven companies, this focus on who this target customer is can sometimes be not either fully fleshed out or thought through. So that's something which I've constantly tried to emphasize amongst my product teams, and even in cases where that target customer is well understood, sort of having that focus and discipline to building products that ultimately meet those needs of the target customer without getting distracted can also be a challenge. So I want to spend some time talking about why it's important to have that level of focus. And then the second aspect is sort of taking sort of this notion of elephants, deer, and rabbits, and sort of applying that to your customers and thinking about those animal sizes in that context and what it actually means as you're building product out. And then lastly, I'd like to provide a few practical steps and takeaways that as product managers you can take away to help your organization not only identify sort of their target customers, but also just be more focused and disciplined, because at the end of the day, as product managers, we constantly battle in a world where there's constant time pressure, limited resources. So it's important for us to sort of make the right decisions in terms of where we're going to invest our product development efforts towards truly the things that customers, your target set of customers, really need. So with that, I'd like to start with a little story. This is a story about my friend Paul, who's been working at a startup. This is obviously somewhat of a hypothetical story, but I can't tell you how much of a resemblance this bears to a number of different companies I've talked to or interacted with in the past. So my friend here, Paul, and I are meeting after a while. So I go up to Paul and say, "Hey, Paul, how are things coming along with this new app you're building?" And Paul says, "Great. We're getting ready to launch it next week. My team and I are really, really excited about it." And I say, "Awesome. That's great. Tell me more about this app. Who's it for?" And Paul says, it's for any company really that wants to boost the productivity of their employees. Our app provides a really cool set of slick features that improve communication in general. And so at this point, I'm sort of thinking, who is this really for, and who's he really going to benefit? So I probe a little bit further and ask him, who are you building this for? Is it for startups, mid-sized companies, large companies? What are you thinking? Who's your customer? And Paul said, you know what? I'd really love to sign a deal with a large company with 10,000 plus employees, but I'll take any deal that comes my way initially. We've got a really killer product, and I can't wait to sell it. So the key takeaway from this conversation is that Paul obviously is very focused on his product, and it obviously might be an amazing product, but ultimately there isn't much of a sense of a go-to-market strategy. And he's probably been building this product based on his intuition rather than really going out and trying to understand ultimately what are the pain points of in the market. And this can be, in general, very dangerous, not really understanding, who your target market is and why you're building what you're building. And there are some cases where it might be okay to go about it this way. So, for example, if you're building a new product in a completely new market, say, for example, artificial intelligence has sort of been something that has been a hot topic of late. That's certainly a new market that's being carved. But in general, it's a very dangerous approach to be taking to building products. And so I want to continue this story and fast forward to sort of 3 months later to sort of give you a better sense of where things go. And so 3 months later, I catch up with Paul after his launch, and I say, "Hey, Paul, how did the launch of your app go?" And Paul says, "You know what? It went well. We also signed up a large customer after we launched." And I say, "That's great news. That's really awesome. Congrats." Paul says, "Yes. It's been quite a lot of work. We've been serving a department of over 2,500 employees, and there are just 6 of us here. We received a number of feature requests and SLA requirements that my team's working to address in the product." And so, I mean, this is an interesting sign because clearly he's got a large customer, very demanding. And so I say to him, "You know what? Seems like your customer's pretty darn demanding." And he says, "I know, but once we make this customer happy, they will be a great reference to bring in more large deals." So the takeaway from the rest of the story is, I think it's great that Paul managed to sign up a customer, a large one at that, and get their product deployed. And it sounds like this customer might be a customer that is actually paying them for the product. He's also getting a lot of great feedback in the process. But with that comes the danger of building a product that's heavily customized for that one company, that one large customer. And so it's really important for him to understand the implications here, that potentially, if he goes down the path of really addressing all of their needs, that he may end up with a product that is completely customized and works just for that one customer and may not necessarily be appropriate for anybody else in the market. So what I want to provide as a summary here is that it's really important as you're building your products to think about who are the customers that you're going after. It's pretty impossible to build a product that will meet all of your customers' needs. I mean, that would be ineffective, and not having any idea at all about who you're going after is also not, as we saw here with Paul, is also very dangerous. So I think in general, it's important to start thinking about, even at the early stages of building your product, to have some high-level idea of who that customer might be. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you spend months and months doing customer research up front, but it does mean picking a market that you want to target. And as you go along, you sort of learn about your customers, you get more specific about who that market is, and you adjust, and you get more specific with time. And so if you come back to sort of those animal metaphors, I think it really helps initially to think about what size customers you're looking to target. So you've got sort of these 3 types of animal metaphors you could apply here. You have elephants, rabbits, and deer. So let's explore them in a little more detail. So if you look at elephants, if you're a hunter, you typically, if you were able to kill one, they feed you for a very long time, and so they're very tempting to hunt down. But because there aren't as many elephants to find, they can generally be harder to catch. They're also very large animals, so hunting them down takes a lot of resources. And if you can't hunt one down soon enough, you can certainly end up starving but not having enough food. So if you were to apply some of these, some of this logic to sort of selling a product to a large company, what you'll find out is, for one, you've got about 28 million businesses in the US, but only about 8,000 of them have above 1,000 employees. And out of those 8,000 businesses, only about 2,000 have greater than 10,000 employees. So if you're going to go after a target market of large businesses, that's less than 0.1% of the total market. So it's important to be mindful of that. It's also important to understand that going after a large company to sell your product can use up a lot of resources, just as in the case of going after an elephant. So large companies tend to have very many departments. It takes a while to figure out, who the key stakeholders are to talk to, who are some of the decision makers. In many cases, there might be multiple decision makers involved in the process. There might be lots of red tape. So invariably, your sales cycles can last months, if not in some cases also years, to sell your product. And so the example of companies who primarily play in the space of selling to large customers tend to be your IBMs, your SAPs, and Oracles. These are large companies whose customers are primarily Fortune 500 organizations, and they've got the large number of resources in terms of sales and marketing, and the ability to have sort of the financial ability to sort of have longer sales cycles in place. And on the flip side, if you're a customer, it's a safe choice to go and choose IBM, Oracle, or SAP as your partner, as opposed to working with a relatively unknown startup or small emerging company. So that's another. So that's certainly another consideration to keep in mind. And then lastly, even if you're lucky enough to start working with customers, as you could see in the case of my friend Paul, if you did end up catching one, there could also be consequences where your customer could be very demanding, has very specific needs around performance, certain feature sets that are very customized to their needs, and you could end up using up a lot of resources and time specifically to address the need of that one customer. On the other side of the spectrum, you have rabbits, and rabbits, they're plentiful. You have tens and thousands of them, just like you have tens and thousands of small to medium-sized businesses. And the benefits of going after rabbits are that, given that they're plentiful, they're easier to catch. And you'll typically see that, many companies start out selling their products to small and medium-sized businesses as a result, because there's generally fewer barriers to entry, there's shorter sales cycles. On the flip side, rabbits tend to scatter and run away when you try to catch them, and you also need a lot of them. You need to hunt down a lot of them to have enough to feed you. So the constant challenge is that you're always looking for them, because rabbits tend to be very price conscious. They're also the market for building products in the SMB space tends to be a market where your customers they're very sensitive to price, and so you're constantly competing with other competitors in the space, all of whom are jockeying for each other's business based on pricing and functionality. As soon as one customer adds a new feature or drops their price slightly, customers will immediately jump over. And so unless you're able to create a set of high switching costs, or you've been able to carve sort of a very strong brand in the space, it can ultimately be quite challenging to go out and sell to small and medium-sized businesses. So a few examples of companies that have done well in the space: GoDaddy, who provides sort of domain and hosting services, Intuit, who provides sort of a bunch of financial tools, Zoho, who sells CRM software for small businesses, have all gained a very large foothold in the small to medium market space. And if you take, for example, GoDaddy, they gained sort of an early foothold in their market, sort of have a very strong brand name, do a lot of marketing and advertising. I'm sure a lot of you have seen sort of their Super Bowl ads as well. And then the switching costs of switching your domain over from GoDaddy to another partner, if any of you have ever done that, I mean, that's a fairly painful process. And lastly, you've got deer. So deer are somewhere in the spectrum between elephants and rabbits. They fall somewhere in between. So, they certainly have more meat on them if you're a hunter, and there's also plenty of them to catch. And they're not as demanding to hunt down as an elephant. So you don't need as many resources. And then if you catch several of them, then you aren't necessarily beholden to any individual one. For example, if you have elephants that you're going after, if you don't end up catching them, or if you have one large customer decide to churn, it can have a serious material impact to your business. But with a deer, that impact isn't as much. And so generally speaking, Deere tend to be a good size customer for startups and early stage companies to go after when building their products. And you've generally seen a lot of the newer SaaS businesses like Zendesk, Marketo, Good Data have had a lot of success getting to market and targeting sort of the mid-market segment. Obviously, whether or not you go after deer, elephants, or rabbits ultimately comes down to sort of taking a look at the market dynamics in the space, looking at the barriers to entry. But it helps to sort of be mindful of all of the various challenges you might face, depending on whether you go after one animal versus the other, and the implications of each as you make that decision. And so another way to think about this is to think about, if you were to build a $10 million revenue business, which generally is a pivotal milestone for software businesses, and you were to sort of chart out, like you see on this graph, how many customers would you need to get to that $10 million business? You can actually see on this chart here, if you were to go after rabbits, you're generally looking at roughly 100,000 or more customers if you were to charge about $100 a year as your annual revenue per customer. If you were to go after deer, you're looking at more at 1,000 or so customers, and then if you're looking at elephants, you're looking at 10 customers, all of whom are in the 7-figure range in terms of bringing in deals of that size. And so you can clearly see here why it's attractive for many companies to want to go after elephants, primarily because you only need to get a small number of customers. At the same time, there's a lot of implications here for us as product managers. So if you're working at a company that's really targeting those Fortune 500 customers and those 7-figure deals, the tactics that you employ from a product management perspective to do your customer research are going to be fundamentally different. If you're going to go after elephants, for example, you can actually go on site, invest your time in really building that personal relationship with each of your customers because you have so few of them, and really doing a lot of qualitative research into understanding their pain points. If you are on the other end of the spectrum where your company is selling to small and medium-sized businesses, you can go after the methods or the techniques that you're going to leverage to go after your customer base are going to be a lot different because you really can't do a lot of qualitative research with a customer base that size. So you're going to combine a lot of quantitative analysis and analytics to understanding sort of how your customers are behaving, employ surveys to understand sort of what their needs and pain points are, and selectively do qualitative research. And then in combination with that, you also want to think about how you roll out products. So if you're going after rabbits where there's a tendency to hop on and jump to sort of the next competitor as soon as there's a next new feature or a price cut, generally speaking, you want to have a good amount of velocity in terms of your product development, and you want to constantly be able to churn out new features and roll those out to your customers on a regular basis every few weeks. Whereas if you're going after your larger customers, those customers tend to prefer more predictability in your software releases. So generally speaking, you're going to have 2 to 4 major releases a year, and there's generally a lot of effort and hand-holding that goes into sort of your go-to-market approach. Most large software businesses that cater to these elephant customers generally tend to have an annual customer conference where they spend a lot of time talking about the items on the roadmap, about how they're going to add value to their businesses, and generally speaking, those customers are very involved in understanding sort of how each feature is ultimately going to impact the success of their business. So moving on to the next part of our presentation, which is sort of in our role as product managers, ultimately, I think of us as being sort of having the strategic role where not only do we understand the company's vision and goals, but we also have a good understanding of our customer needs, and we serve as the voice of the market. So we have the unique ability of being able to marry those things together and ultimately carve out a very strategic roadmap and influence sort of what customers to go after. So what I'd like to share is sort of 3 takeaways or steps that we can take in our role as product managers to ultimately identify and go after the right set of customers. And so the first one here comes down to sort of understanding what size customer is ideal for your target market. I think that generally speaking, most of us do spend certain amounts of time talking to our customers, but I generally recommend spending about 20 to 30% of your time at the very minimum with your customers, and more so if you're in the early stages of developing a product. The second thing I talk about is helping your organization stay focused. And generally, what I've found in my experience as a product manager is, everyone is so focused on the execution, sort of the day-to-day execution, that there really isn't anyone asking sort of the tough questions on why are we building what we are, how does it tie back to our strategy and vision, and ultimately to making our product successful in a given market. And lastly, a practice that I've constantly advocated throughout all of my teams I've worked with is sort of analyzing the features in your product periodically. In other words, what was built 2 or 3 years ago might have been great for your customers back then, but businesses are constantly evolving, and as product managers, it's our job to look at the features in our products and constantly be asking ourselves, are these features still needed? Who is exactly using it? And how is it adding value to our target customers? And I'd like to dive into these 3 things in a little more detail on the following slides. So when you think of sort of understanding what size customer is ideal, really going deep into understanding the problems of each customer segment. So digging deeper, then even looking at the size of the customers if it makes sense, determining ultimately sort of based on those pain points that you discover, what ultimate features are going to resonate for that target market. And then ultimately working with your sales and marketing teams to sort of carve out that go-to-market strategy and thinking about sort of how you're going to build your product, price it, place, and promote it, which is essentially sort of the 4 Ps of marketing. And depending on whether you decide that that target customer is an elephant or a rabbit or a deer, and perhaps even going a level below, thinking about the team and the skills you need to assemble to make your product a success, because the tactics you're going to employ as a product person to get your product to market are going to vary. If you're going to go after larger customers, Fortune 500, 7-figure deals, the type of sales team that you need is a much more sophisticated sales process that will take several weeks or months, and then there's a lot of awareness and education that grows into making sure customers really understand sort of what are the key pain points that your product is looking to solve and how ultimately it's going to add value to their business. Whereas if you're catering your product to much smaller businesses in the SMB side, there's going to need to be a component within the product that's built out to create a low-touch sales process where you have an automated marketing process built out, credit card billing put in place within your product, and so most of your marketing and sales will be fairly self-service and automated. And then if you're an early stage startup, what I typically recommend is to really force yourself to really pick one segment to go after and to really focus hard on trying to go deep and understanding sort of what the needs are within the segment and constantly iterating through that process to understand whether or not what you're building is actually solving the needs of those customers, and over time, clarifying those assumptions. So as and when you need to adjust your customer set that you go after or to get more specific, feeling free to do so through that process.
So I have a question that just came in. This one's from Dave, so I'm going to hand it over to him to ask his question.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, hi, Andy. I was just curious, in your experience, if you've ever worked on or maybe talked to a friend, colleague who's worked on an elephant-focused product where they've done very frequent, if not continuous, releasing. I know you said it's also been my experience where, some of the really big enterprise clients like to do only a couple of releases a year.
Yeah.
But have you ever seen anything in the opposite direction where they've been more open to continuous deployment?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I've constantly talked to some of my friends who worked within those sort of companies like a Workday or NetSuite. What I've typically learned is that most customers don't necessarily want to be surprised by having a major feature release that they weren't aware of. And so what you typically see is more of the minor releases happening on a more frequent basis. So, for example, you launch a major feature and then realize that perhaps you need to add maybe a more minor feature as a complement to it, or maybe you need to fix an issue that came up based on the feedback from those customers. So you do want the agility to be able to do that minor release without having to wait 3 months out. But generally speaking, there's so much involvement that goes into rolling out that feature more than just developing it from a go-to-market perspective, creating sort of documentation around it, creating the positioning around it, making sure you train the sales team, the marketing team, and how to speak to that, your customer success teams. That generally speaking, you're typically looking at rolling in major features into sort of the next big release. And I think that generally makes sense overall. Sort of balancing sort of that, having that nimbleness to sort of roll out minor things as needed, but also sort of keeping sort of the major items on your roadmap confined to sort of those major releases every quarter or every 6 months.
Great. Makes sense. Thanks.
Yep.
Excellent. So that's all the questions we have at the moment, but keep them coming in as we wind down on this talk. And you keep them coming in by going to theproductmentor.com/live and get them in before the end. Back to you, Andy.
All right. So coming back here. So the second step that I was talking about really relies on a lot of focus and discipline. And so the example I like to provide here is sort of the example of the scalpel and the Swiss Army knife. As a child growing up, I used to love Swiss Army knives, but the challenge you have with Swiss Army knives, while they do a lot of amazing things, you can see all the cool gadgets they have, is they aren't particularly great at doing one thing really well. And this is a common mistake I've come across when building products, where you find a product that generally does a lot of different things, and meets sort of 80% of the needs of your different segments of customers, but doesn't really do one thing really well. And I see that as being generally a problem when it comes to building software, because ultimately it becomes hard to message, what exactly your product is about to your customers and why they should pick your product over picking a competitor's product. And ultimately, at the end of the day, what I find is that in order to be disciplined and focused, it requires a product manager to be really headstrong and say no to some really highly attractive customer opportunities that are attractive in the short run, but don't necessarily contribute towards your roadmap in terms of staying focused towards meeting those needs of your target customer. And so what I typically advocate for is really focusing on building those 2 or 3 core killer features that will ultimately solve the needs of your target market. Less is indeed more, as the saying goes. And so keeping those things in mind, those principles in mind, ultimately I think is important. And helping your organization stay focused and reminding them of who your target customers are and why you're prioritizing the roadmap the way you are is ultimately a key skill for good product managers to have. And then lastly, I guess the other analogy I'll throw out there is sort of this notion of painkillers and vitamins. As most of you are aware, vitamins are preventative, they're nice to have, but not necessarily must-haves. And so when you typically go into the drugstore, you find that most vitamins tend to be sold at a major discount compared to sort of the expensive painkiller prescriptions that you might need to take. So as a product manager, as you're looking at sort of all the potential features that you could have on your roadmap and prioritize, always try to think about, what are those painkiller features that you could add into your product that are materially going to drive more revenue or lower current costs for your customers when it comes to their business. And if they can, if you're able to address those needs without having to add, a new line into their budget, that's even better. So, keep in mind, each of those principles as you're thinking about prioritizing your roadmap. And then lastly, this is a nice technique that I've come across when it comes to analyzing the features in your product periodically. So what I typically have my product teams do is to sort of plot each of their features on this on a graph like this, where on the x-axis you have the number of customers who are using that feature, and then on the y-axis, the level at which they're using that feature at. So whether they use it sometimes or all the time or very little of the time. And what you typically want to see here is you want to have as many of your features towards the top right section of this graph, essentially that rectangle with the star. What naturally tends to happen over time is that you'll see your features spread out a little bit more, and you'll see them either cluster somewhere in the middle or towards the left. And what's really dangerous is when you get features that are towards the top left-hand corner. These are essentially features that a very small set of your customers are using, but they're using it all the time. And so if, for example, you decided to retire any one of those features, it's going to be very challenging because you're going to have very vocal customers. Even though there are a small set of them, those customers are going to be very vocal against having those features retired. But ultimately, at the same time, what you have to recognize as a product manager is that those features are taking away from the focus within your product, because ultimately you've got some fragmentation amongst your customers, and those customers who are using those features, while perhaps those may have been core to their needs in the past, but looking at where things are today, that's no longer the case. So think about other companies that have done this. If you think about Google, they've retired and they have a graveyard of features that they've had to say they're no longer supporting. So you may want to think about that. And also another approach you could take is to think about, if you do want to retain these features, what is it really going to take to move them to the top right quadrant? What other things do you need to build into them to perhaps move them along this graph? And ultimately, at the end of the day, it helps to keep in mind sort of the cost of maintaining a feature and the complexity it adds to your product. So the more features you have in the middle and the left of the graph, the more time you're spending maintaining those features that perhaps aren't necessarily cost-effective for your product in terms of addressing issues that come up, maintaining sort of those features over time, and potentially adding to the technical debt in your product. So lastly, I want to summarize by just sort of covering some of the benefits that I've highlighted throughout this presentation from really having a good target set of customers identified and constantly being focused and disciplined. I think ultimately at the end of the day, if you're able to have a very clear set of target customers, it makes our jobs easier as product managers because we can better articulate the specific needs and pain points of our target market. And that helps us a lot in terms of prioritizing the features on our roadmap. That becomes more effective. And if we're able to stay focused and disciplined in delivering that roadmap without avoiding distractions coming in from the outside, where potentially features are coming in for customers who may not be part of that target market, it really helps us get towards having faster time to value on new products and features. So ultimately, at the end of the day, this creates sort of a self-reinforcing cycle and a good habit to put in place in terms of your product development process. And then once you start to get into this habit, what you begin to realize that you can actually be more proactive in anticipating, how the customer's needs are going to evolve with time. So if you're going to be going after your large customers, in the case of if you're chasing after elephants, then it helps to just stay a step ahead of them in terms of anticipating what exactly they might need even before they realize what it is. And then lastly, from a positioning and messaging standpoint, it's so much easier if you have a clear target market to put together a lot of the product marketing documentation with your marketing team and sales team, so that it's just a whole lot more tighter and more impactful when it comes to selling your product. And what this comes down to at the end of the day is, not only are you saving time by working on the right things and minimizing distractions, but you're ultimately focusing your efforts in the right areas, and you're helping your customers make more money or save more money at the end of the day. So with that, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. Hopefully, you found some of the things I shared during this talk helpful. There's a couple of blogs that I used as inspiration for this presentation that I'd love to recommend. One of them is called Both Sides of the Table by Mark Suster, who's a venture capitalist. Highly recommend taking a look at some of his blog posts, and he actually talked about elephants, deer, and rabbits in one of them. And then the other one is Intercom, which is another enterprise company. They maintain a blog as well, where they talk about a lot of the best practices around product management. So definitely give that a shot and take a look and see sort of what are some of the interesting things they have to share. And with that, Jeremy, it's back to you.
Great. Yeah, and again, I thank you for thanking all of us, but also thank you to you, Andy Wadhwa, VP and Head of Product over at Boost Media, for today's discussion of elephants, deer, and rabbits, choosing the right customer for your product. And we can assure you that none of these animals were hurt or were intended to be hurt. And as always, the presentation will also be posted to our SlideShare channel. And a big thank you from me, Jeremy Horn, the product guy, and to everyone else who joined us today and the product mentor. And don't forget, if you want to be a product mentor like today's speaker, Andy, to product people of all sorts, visit theproductmentor.com, check it out, and sign up today. Session 6 starts on January 8th, so if you want to be a mentor, today is the day to sign up. Also, if you're looking to fill a new product job with a great product person, visit our very own free-for-all job board at theproductjobs.com. And with all of that said, I'll see you guys all next time. Bye.